My name is Spood, and I've been living with Crohn's disease for about 20 years. During this time, I've learned a lot about myself and also the disease, and given that I've got 20 years under my belt, I just want to share some of those experiences, views, and tips with you now. I do hope this is generally helpful to anyone who has friends and family going through it, or they're going through it themselves. So when I was about 16 years old, I was suffering with Crohn's related symptoms for about 18 months before they knew it was actually Crohn's. Severe weight loss, digestive distress, acid reflux, pain in the bowels, everything. And I went down to 6.5 stone before my mum sort of finally hauled me into and made them do something about it. Because ultimately I was on the merry-go-round with gastroenterology for a long time, because the thing is with Crohn's disease, it's often mistaken for other conditions, or it's just a bit of acid reflux, it's IBS, it's gastroenteritis, so I was just having a bit of a bad time, and it just kept going and going, and that was sort of really mentally taxing at the time, and my mum obviously thought she was going to lose me, so she did the parent thing and took me in. Really grateful she did that in hindsight, of course. But the thing is then is like, Crohn's was like a lot harder to diagnose compared to what it is now. I think now you can probably even get like a blood test and they can monitor inflammation factors, whereas back then, at least it didn't seem as prevalent in society as it does today. And going through it back then, it was really tough, but come out on the other side, of course, which I'm really grateful for. But nevertheless, dealing with it as a sort of a quiet, shy teenager who was probably in the unpopular crowd at school, not very well liked, apart from obviously my friends who were just as unpopular as I was. Yeah, obviously not speaking up about it. I never told my parents that I was sort of essentially vomiting stomach contents on the way home from school on a regular basis. Hindsight, I couldn't tell you why, but I think it was just sort of me trying to keep things to myself and plod on, keep stiff upper lip. I was relying on parents to figure out what was going on, really, and doctors as well. But the difference between dealing with sort of Crohn's now versus back then, of course, is that I didn't have to worry about having a roof over my head or paying the bills or going to work or looking after a family, luckily. So, of course, that's a big difference dealing with it then versus dealing with it now. Of course, now dealing with an adult, I have all these responsibilities, but I also have the knowledge of what exactly is going on with me and how to manage it. So that makes it a lot easier as well. Probably another difference between then and now is that for endoscopies, colonoscopies, which are part of, diagnostics with Crohn's, is that as a teenager, I got sedated, not sedated necessarily, but actually put properly to sleep, because sedation isn't the same thing. I actually got properly anesthetic and put to sleep and didn't have to deal with any of what was going on, and just when I woke up that was over. Whereas as an adult, of course, you are definitely aware, even with sedation to some degree, you're aware of what's going on, and that's certainly a bit more of a challenge, but you have to rise to that challenge. Another thing I'd probably say about Crohn's in the last 20 years is that it kind of puts you in touch with your own body, because you have to listen to your body and what it's telling you with managing symptoms like flare-ups, or if you eat a certain food or drink a certain drink that triggers you, you've got to sort of recognize the symptoms that cuisine has had on you. So getting more in touch with yourself, it's actually quite a good thing in a way, rather than just palming it off or sweeping it under the rug. You've got to be alert, you've got to be aware of what's going on, and certainly 20 years later, I would hope that that is the case. Ultimately, I lost 4 months of school when I was 16 due to this illness, but the difference was by then is that I knew exactly what was going on and what the disease had a name, so we were able to have a plan of attack, essentially, and try all these sort of techniques, experimental at times as well. And because of that, it brought out a lot more courage. For someone who's quite shy, I was like, what's the point of being holding back in life if you have to deal with this much issues medically? If you can pass this, you can do anything. So, I got through it and it really benefited me. I think one of the things as well in hindsight is that I wish I knew what the triggers were when they were happening in those 18 months that I didn't know what was going on. I know hindsight is a wonderful thing, but yeah, even if you're having gastroenteritis or IBS, there's certain things along those lines that you will get triggered by. It can be anything from dairy to spicy foods to smoking to alcohol. All those things will play a role in a variety of conditions. I do have a separate video on how it relates to Crohn's particularly, so if you want to check that out, you can. But ultimately, yeah, that's definitely one of the things that I wish I could have known, because then I might have been able to take some preemptive action before the diagnosis. So the difference between Crohn's 20 years ago and now is certainly the medical science front is certainly increased and gotten better. And, you know, I've been assured of this recently because I've had to go back into gastroenterology and have consultants and IBD nurses and things like that. And one of the things they do stress is that the medical treatment I got back then is so much more better than it was back then. So it's really, really reassuring to hear that, you know, medical sciences has came on it. And I'd like to think, you know, that I also played a part in it, because I actually had a surgery to take out the most infected part of my bowel, essentially, and stitch it all back up. And once they took it out, you know, I had to sign this letter to say, yes, you can have that and donate it to medical science, which is quite bizarre, because what else am I going to do with it? But essentially, because it's part of my body, I still have to sign to say you can take that and use it for medical science. And quite a bizarre thing, but at the same time, you know, you never know, that might have helped, I suppose. So ultimately, you know, why am I making this video? What's the point? I can't help but feel reflective of my journey with Crohn's because of the recent flare-up I'm having right now, and sort of it's probably one of the worst flare-ups I've had in 20 years. It's not as bad as when I got diagnosed, to the extent I had to go into surgery and be off school for months at a time, but it's still probably one of the worst ones I've had in 20 years. So it makes you think about what kind of journey I've been on with this. The times that I've had to sort of slow down, or I've known a trigger but I've kind of done it anyway because I'm silly, and then felt regrets after it, and trying to keep up with everybody else when you're not really like up to it because of the symptoms of Crohn's, like fatigue is still one, for example, and having to go to the toilet more regularly. But ultimately, I think that dealing with Crohn's will also help you grow as an individual, and that's, you know, this is what this video is about. It's looking back on that journey and looking at what's different now compared to when I first got diagnosed as well, in terms of diagnostics, tests, approaches, things like that. So if there is one message to take away from this, if you feel like you've got any symptoms of Crohn's, which can be weight loss, fatigue, diarrhea, abdominal pain in the intestines, acid reflux, anything digestive related really, and it's just not going away, don't stay silent. You know, I realize it's difficult, but make sure you don't stay silent and you're speaking out about it and you're pressing the doctors for an answer and not letting up. That's the kind of thing that I've also gotten accustomed to as well, is that this whole idea of don't rock the boat in terms of trying to get the doctors to do what you need them to do is certainly something I've got a lot better at. I'm not suggesting you go in and shout abuse or anything like that, because that'll just get you shut down through it and kicked out of the place. But you can do it in a way that says to them, you know, I'm really suffering here and this isn't a joke, and I need for you to take this seriously. It's kind of like a technique I've learned. I'm probably channeling my mother a little bit, but yeah, I mean, there's certainly ways to do it anyway. But hopefully this kind of gives you an insight into Crohn's just generally. But I want to make this video for me as well as you, to share this sort of the differences between what it's like then and what it is like now. There's a lot of things to be grateful for now, and hopefully, you know, you're getting the level of care that you need if you happen to suffer from it like I do. If you've got any particular experiences to share with this, feel free to leave it in the comments. Otherwise, there are other videos about my experience with this in more detail, my personal story, the kind of scans that you'll expect, and also sort of dietary recommendations, how it relates to work, how does it relate to traveling, things like that. So hopefully you find this helpful. Thank you very